What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Spark the Fire. I'm your host, Landon Rhodes. And just a quick reminder before we get into today's episode, please leave a written review and a rating on iTunes. That is how we move up in the algorithm. That is how we get things rolling. I've got a really special guest in the studio today, my man, Deepak Keshwani. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming in. It's good to see you again.
It is my pleasure, man. This is, I've just watched from afar online, looking at what y'all are doing here. And, anytime you see a former student do something interesting, fun, and warms your heart, right? But the kind of interactions that, I've had with you, with Jacob and others while you were students, we got close, right?
Yeah.
By the time you graduated. So it's fun. For me, it's an honor to be here.
What's really interesting about this episode, guys, is the fact that Deepak was my advisor when I was at UNL going through the Mechanized Systems Management program. So I wanted to bring him on today to talk a little bit about that and brag a little bit about the program for one, and really unpack why, bridge the gap between college and entrepreneurship, because there's some people that say you don't need it. There's some people that say it's an absolute must. I've found a ton of value in my experience in college, not only through a fraternity, but also through specifically working with this man. So specifically, you got me through college. And I know for the Mech Systems guys that are listening to this, they're like, oh yeah, definitely we would be screwed without Deepak. So talk about what you're doing today, and then let's get into the program a little bit.
Sure. So currently I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biological Systems Engineering, and I have a 75% teaching, 25% research appointment. And that's changed over the years, so I've kind of gravitated more towards the teaching side. And a big part of that teaching is, I teach in the Mechanized Systems Management program. I coordinate it, I do the advising, I work with students. These days, I'm also spending a bit of my time in the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources Dean's Office. So I have a 25% appointment there, just working on student development issues, really thinking about all the things that I'm learning, coordinating the Mechanized Systems Management program, and then trying to see, okay, how can we scale that? What makes sense to do at the college level, right? So it's just a great opportunity for me to learn, but also try to have an impact beyond just that program at the college as well. So that's kind of a big part of what I'm doing on the teaching side. On my research side, I got some creative projects right now. I'm not sure if Jacob's told you this, but one of our projects is we're trying to use research information and research-based tools to drive immersive educational video games and gaming for targeted at youth, to try to understand concepts like systems thinking, ag literacy, sustainability,
Right.
Really. So that's kind of been a very interesting project for the last few years, and we're just excited. We're seeing some great opportunities to take that to the next level.
What does that look like? So that's kids, basically kids that are thinking about farming in the future. They would have real clear variables that they could work with. Not Farm Simulator, but really clear dead-on variables that truly affect.
So here's
things.
an example, right? In the agronomy world, one of the popular research models is DSAT. It's a crop growth model, right? Researchers use it. And DSAT requires a lot of inputs that are real, tangible things that producers have to make decisions on, right? And so the game sort of provides an interface for a user as they're playing to decide what to do, and that gets put into this model, and then what happens in the game is that model spits back the result, and that's what the user sees in the game. So they're actually using real information about soils, real information about the weather, real information about precipitation, right? And the types of crops they're growing, the row spacing, and that's coming back in terms of yield, right? And so the irrigation decisions you make, right? All that kind of information as they're making those choices during the game, that information is then being run through this model on a server. And the beauty of this is the student doesn't need to see the complexity of the model, but they're still being able to learn from it and actually get information from a validated scientific model.
And then apply it.
And apply it,
then,
right?
Then,
and learn from it. That's the main thing.
You're gamifying agriculture to such a level that it's so granular that they can actually go apply this, and they can adjust the row spacing on when they plant next year, and they can say, this is what
and that's the beauty of it, is the learning that it affords in making connections. So if I do this, what is happening? right?
Yeah.
And then based on what
that's
is
awesome.
happening, what can I do better?
I remember, so bringing it back to mech systems, I remember the first time you showed us in a grain handling class, I think it was a what if analysis on Excel. And that, like, for people that really get Excel, it's like the most basic shit ever, but it blew our minds knowing that you could do predictive analysis based on just a simple data set.
Yep.
And I remember finding that, and that was a defining moment of why I knew Excel was going to matter in my life, and how much. And that's one thing we joke about, Jacob and I. Jacob's our producer here at Grindstone, and we talk about how we got really good at Excel due to mech systems. And that was one of those things in business of how the parallels of how this works together is you have to be able to understand how to build a cash flow. You know, I had our CFO build us out like just a simple cash flow chart. But once she built that for me, I knew exactly what to do, you know, after I got the formulas and everything. So it's just really interesting to see the parallels between what you're teaching at mech systems and then in business.
Absolutely. And that's a really great point there, because if you think about, you know, I'm going to go on a little bit of a history lesson here, right? If you think about the origins of our program, you know, it's been around a while, right? It started in the early 50s to provide farmers the necessary training they needed to be, you know, successful at then that time period. So if you think about what was going on in the 50s, you know, you're coming out of the World War. Markets are opening up, right, for agriculture. You know, U.S. exports to Europe, Asia, everywhere. We've got machinery, technology coming in because we have such great industrial manufacturing capacity. Again, because of the efforts in the World War II, right? But then we're also dealing with the after effects of the Dust Bowl, right? So there's these environmental aspects happening. So I think it was smartly recognized then that farmers, in order to be successful, needed to know a lot of things. Not at a ton of depth, but enough to make good decisions, right? And so that's what those programs came about as, and that was what our program was. It was an ag mechanization degree that had that breadth, right? To really prepare good problem solvers and decision makers. Fast forward 30, 40 years, right? Things are going well, and all of a sudden you get a farm crisis happening. And farmers are going out and trying to get jobs. And it turns out that producers that had these ag mechanization training, that breadth, understanding different concepts, they're able to think about things through the lens of systems. How does what I do affect something else, and vice versa, right? And they were getting hired by industry. And then all of a sudden, industry is saying, yo, I've got something here. Right. There's something about these graduates that just makes sense, right? We put them in charge of facilities, grain operator, elevator managers, ethanol plant managers. You put them around equipment, they know exactly what to do. And we learned from that, right? And that's when our program started evolving to the next level. So we rebranded ourselves in the early 90s as Mechanized Systems Management, really emphasizing that systems management piece as well. Right? Which is cuts across farming, right? It does. You can apply it to farming, but you could apply it to a lot of other industries, right? I think it's a mindset that comes with being able to put together information from all these different pieces to a cohesive decision. And in many ways, I think that's the beauty of the program, is that I think whether we intended to do this or not, we've got a program that's really creating that mindset that helps people make better decisions based on integrating different pieces of knowledge, right?
And that's the... if you had to have one thing, if you go into entrepreneurship, it's that you have to be able to make good decisions.
Absolutely.
You're faced with decisions, and in life in general, but in entrepreneurship specifically, you're faced with decisions every single day that can make or break your company. Absolutely. And at least maybe not every day, but every month could make or break your company. And that sort of ability to look at things from a 10,000 foot view is something that I never really fully got to appreciate until I had a team. Because when you're in it, you become the mechanic of the system. You become the operator. If you're comparing this to something, you're becoming the sprayer operator or the planter on the farm, right? So looking at that and being able to scale back or scale up and look at it from a 10,000 foot view, now I have such a deep appreciation for systems and process, and I'm actively investing and paying people to teach me more about this as it applies to business. But I think the willingness to accept the fact that this all has to work together and it has to be very cohesive at the top level, that's something that's allowed us to move really quickly. And I think our whole team really buys into that idea, likely because of what I learned subconsciously through 4 years of education with you. And what do you think is the big draw for entrepreneurs to come into the University of Nebraska? Because you get a lot of kids that come from farm background and they actively know I'm going back to the farm, but they don't, even when I was in school, they didn't say, oh, I'm going to go be an entrepreneur. They said, I'm going to go back to the farm, but they never made that, association until like the last few years probably. And now you have more people saying that.
You have a lot more people saying it. Yep.
And so what do you think draws people into that today?
It's a good question. And I've thought a lot about it because I'm seeing that shift happen, right? I've been doing my job now for about a decade. It's crazy, right? You know? And what I'm sensing is that two things. The agriculture as an industry is just transforming at such a rapid pace, right? I mean, the pace of innovation is it's tremendous, right?
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is that we're realizing that, like many industries, right, if we cannot continue to thrive with the status quo, right? Like many industries, we're realizing that our competition across the world is catching up, or in some cases have already exceeded us, right? We're realizing that the challenges that agriculture is facing are immense too, whether you think about the challenges associated with the changing climate, challenges associated with economies growing and constricting, right? All those challenges.
Organic versus...
all those different things that are coming at you, consumer preferences changing, right? That's a great example, right? And all those things are happening, and you realize that I have to be willing to take a few risks, calculated risks. I have to be willing to try different things. I have to be willing, not because for the sake of being innovative, but because it's now critical for me to continue to thrive, right? So many of my kids come in and they have a real passion, and they are dedicated to the craft of farming. They are agriculturalists through and through, right? They believe in it so much that I think they want to see that continue. And that desire to see that industry flourish and thrive is what's causing them to look at it through the lens of entrepreneurship, right? There's a deeper desire there to see that thrive and continue in the future, right? And then they put that desire against the changing landscape. I don't think you've got any other option. You have to be entrepreneurial in your approach.
It's innovate or die. And that's... And
not just
stagnation,
not just for independently, right? It's not just personal, but it's for the community as a whole, right? It's this entire field of agriculture, right? Because if you look at most farmers, there's a heart issue as well, right?
What do you mean by that?
So there's a love for what they do, right? There is also this desire to make sure that the field of agriculture continues to thrive, grow, because it's essential. We are trying. I mean, it's a noble endeavor, right? To feed the world, grow enough food, fuel, fiber, and so forth. And I think there's a genuine desire to see that continue, and see that continue in a manner that the next generation can do it, and so forth. And I think that's part of it too, right? I don't think everybody understands that when you're 17 or 18, right? But I think there is that motivation there, right?
Yeah, like their mom and dad have showed them. This is because a lot of that comes from legacy of a family farm of saying like, come back, take over the farm because it's been our family for 4 generations or 2. That's part of it, I think. And then you get into school and they get exposed to these new ideas and they realize like, oh my God. Like,
I can see the connections. I can see these things, I got a story there on that. We got a recent graduate who, Santosh, right? You took his class, Santosh Pitla. Yeah. So he took his class and learned about like these tools and gadgets where you can collect information from machinery, and he's like graduated and he keeps coming back and it's like, hey, can I borrow that? I got a little thing I want to do.
And he has fully autonomous tractors systems now, right? That he's building.
Yeah, Santosh, that's one of our faculty members, and he's working on that. That's part of his big research project where he's envisioning sort of what does autonomous vehicles, what does that whole idea look like in agriculture, right? If it were to play out. So he's really at the cutting edge in terms of concepts that could work, right? I think it's wide open there, boy. There's so many neat ideas.
Yeah.
You know, I often tell students, I talk to high school students all the time. I said, if you think about autonomous vehicles in farming, think about like a tractor, right? Why does it look the way it looks? Why does it design the way it looks? What's at the center of the tractor? The person, right?
Yeah.
You take that person out. Does it have to look anything like that?
No.
Exactly, right? And so all of a sudden that clicks. I do that. I ask that question at NAY all the time.
The center of gravity of the entire machine.
Yes.
It's all to protect the person inside of the machine.
And so can you imagine the possibilities?
Yeah.
When you take that out of the picture and all of a sudden it's wide open.
Have you seen Interstellar, the movie Interstellar? Yes. Yeah. I love watching that autonomous combine just plow through the field. I'm like, that is so cool. And the fact that they started with that right on the farm, do you think it looks anything like Interstellar, like similar to what that is?
It's hard to know. What I do know is that what's going to drive autonomous vehicle use is a couple factors. One is I think there's infrastructure that needs to be developed, right? I have no doubt that we're going to build the gadget and the tool, right? I think there's plenty of smart minds. They're going to build the autonomous vehicle. They're going to build autonomous ways to irrigate. They're going to build autonomous ways to do conservation tillage. All that's going to happen. But as we get more autonomous, as we get more into a world that is more technology, data-driven, I think infrastructure surrounding that is critical, right? So, for example, having high-speed data, internet in rural areas, right? Those kinds of supporting infrastructure is going to be key, right? And then supporting infrastructure around training and development of farmers, right? And the desire to learn as these things get deployed. What do I need to keep learning?
Right.
Those kinds of supporting things. I think that's going to be the critical piece, right? That I think we're probably a little lagging behind there.
Right. A mindset shift.
Yep. And there's also some serious policy issues, right?
Right.
Anytime you think autonomous, what do you think about liability?
Yeah, right? That's the first thing. Well, and I use Tesla as a great example, right? How many car accidents happen in a given day? Thousands, and thousands of deaths from car accidents. I don't know how many per day, but the one time when Tesla ran, I think there was a Tesla vehicle that ran into a semi, and as the semi was turning, and because their sensors thought that the side of the white semi was blue sky. And so it just kept going, right?
Yeah.
And didn't get the stopping. And then they learned from that, fixed the problem. But when that happened, their stock price dropped, and then there was this big halt on autonomous cars. Like that person wouldn't have died. It's like, think about how many people they saved though. The net loss is going, net loss is going down and down and down every day. You're right though. That's a big policy thing. They're gonna have to figure that out.
I think so. And then the other thing related to that is, so adoption rates are going to be interesting, but I think also don't want to overlook this simple idea that as those technologies are being built, right, there's several supporting technologies that are being developed that have immediate use. Right. So if you think about the caliber of sensors that are going to be needed in a field, right, to sense what plant, because you're not just talking about doing things autonomously, you're also talking about doing things precisely, right? That's the value, right? By the plant. Right. And so if you think about the types of sensors, detection mechanisms, the rate at which the algorithms that need to respond quickly, those are all technologies that need to be developed incrementally. So as we go towards a future that's entirely autonomous, there is so much value to come from now to then, because guess what? Those technologies aren't going to be lying on a shelf until we're ready to deploy them. They're going to be put into existing systems, right? So our current systems are going to get smarter, more efficient, right? And we're already seeing that, right? Yeah. And so I think that's the real value too. We can't think about just the value as being that 10 years from now when we have, or whatever that timeline is. It's what's going to happen between now and then. A great parallel is the NASA program, right? As we worked towards getting to the moon, the technologies that enabled us to do that have had far-reaching impacts on the world, right? In a lot of industries, right? Because to achieve that one goal, of getting to the moon required so many things to be developed.
From telecom, just
Exactly.
the communications aspect of it alone.
So I think that's a real value proposition we cannot ignore when we think about autonomous.
So we're going to have some sort of ubiquitous communication system for all the, do you think that's what it's going to look like? Is you've got this one ubiquitous communication system, say it's over 5G or something, right? And it's going to be like a layer above 5G that all of these vehicles, systems, like IoT, right?
Mm-hmm.
It'll be like an IoT framework that you can plug into. Do you think that's what it's going to look like?
It's possible. And, and I'm not an expert in this area, but it's going to have to be something like that, right? Partly because
they have to talk to each other.
They have to communicate.
It's like, think Zapier, right? So that think Zapier, but for all the IoT shit that would have to run a tractor.
But I think you're right. The idea of communication is so critical, right? And doing it across platforms, across products. And I think the industry is already there, right? They're already had a history of there's this group that gets together called Plugfest, right?
Okay.
And you know what they do? Their job is to literally see if things talk, how well they talk, right? How well there's a component from this manufacturer communicate with this planter, communicate with that tractor, and the idea is developing those standards, right?
What you have to democratize it at some point.
I mean, part of it is also having. You also want to think about the end consumer, right?
Right.
And making sure that whatever we're putting out there is they're going to have to use it. So it's one thing to be competitive, but at some point you all have to gather as an industry to make sure that whatever you're building towards the end consumers are going to find it useful.
Yeah.
Right?
Like the USB. Like a USB plug, right? You have to find that commonality.
You have to.
And then you have companies like Apple that come around with, all 6 different connectors. But that's a good, like USB 3.
Like the double dongle.
Yeah, remember? the double. Yeah, you have 2 dongles to make your USB maybe work at 30% capacity. But yeah, that USB, right? That USB 3.0, like that's something that we'll have to find that commonality. Maybe it's a language, right?
Yeah.
That's something to.
And I will tell you, there's smart people working on this.
Yeah.
I am just been so impressed, and my job, and my I always think about, okay, what is my role in this? What is my sphere of influence? And for me, it's, making sure that as an educator, I am connecting my students to the right people, right? So making sure that I work really hard for colleagues that have expertise in this areas to have that face time with students, right?
Mm-hmm.
Make sure the curriculum makes sense. It is useful to them. Those are the kinds of things that I can work on, right? Through that my lens as an educator, I can work on that, right? And so that's kind of the way I approach this issue, is keeping abreast of what's going on, but then making sure that the opportunities for students to learn are there. Mm-hmm. That doesn't automatically happen, right? People work hard at creating those learning opportunities. And that's kind of, I think, something that as we go, as we get more and more along these lines of autonomous vehicles, or whatever that looks like, there's technologies that we're not even thinking about that 5 years from now we're going to be talking about, right?
Yep.
We also have to keep pace with the learning opportunities, right? And that's important too, mm-hmm. right? And that comes back to the point we started with earlier. If you came in, so say 10 years from now, right? Mm-hmm. Autonomous tractors are coming on the market, people buying. If you come to UNL, say a mech systems major, to learn that, and you graduate 4 years later, I would have been an abject failure to that student. Because guess what? By the time they come to when they graduate, technology is going to evolve. Right. I have to be preparing students for a career. That means I can't afford, as much as I want to show you almost make it all about the bells and whistles.
Right.
I have to focus on core concepts. Right? So this idea, I approach technology through the lens of decisions about technology. Because today it might be this, 5 years from now it might be something else. 10 years from now it might be something else. So what is the enduring piece there is what decisions you make about whether or not to use a technology.
Right.
Or how do you evaluate the efficiency of that technology? How do you know it's actually paying off? How do you know it's going to be productive for your operation? Is it going to help you meet your capacity goals? Those kinds of concepts are enduring.
Right.
And that's where I think I want to make sure that as an educator, I leave students with that, because that is enduring. It doesn't matter, that can last a student's career, right? And that's where I'd like to make sure that I continue to focus on.
Yeah, and that's that's such an interesting perspective coming out of that program and then going and doing something completely different, right? I'm sure I'm probably a little bit radical from what most people out of Mech Systems do, but nonetheless, like everybody that came out of that program, they go and lead and go do something and they build something. Most of them go build something. And what do you think the future of, I mean, you did a really good job of explaining what the future of, like, how are we going to navigate the fact that these systems are constantly changing? I look at that from a social media perspective too. New platform will come around every 5-10 years or something along those lines. And it's yes, your strategy is going to have to change of how to look at it, but the reasoning of why it matters to your business and how you can equate it to business results and decisions won't. That you have to have some sort of guiding light that you're following that is going to tell you, I need to make this post. I need to, or in your terms with technology, we really need this autonomous tractor so we can hook it up to, say, something simple like a disc, because it's going to save us X amount of man hours. It's going to save us X amount of just time, labor, attention.
There are some underlying principles, and that you have to have those, there's an intentionality around what what you're just saying right now. You're asking, you're presenting this very intentional way. I'm doing this because of that.
Right.
And those are, I mean, that's an enduring thing. That's a concept, right? Being able to connect the dots, right? So you're making the right decision, right? And so it's the same thing here, right? You can take the subject out of it, right? And you can ask those questions about other things. And that's kind of what the framework.
And that's the system.
Exactly.
That's you overlooking several systems working together.
Exactly.
Which is a business. Right. And we never really talked about that specifically, but what you guys did is you exposed us to different verticals inside of that. But I think that's something that could be interesting for you to explore too, would just be like, how can we holistically talk about how this can actually be an entrepreneurial venture for you? And I know that you're not, Engler at that point, but that piece alone is very interesting. I think you'll have way more kids join if they know this has entrepreneurial intention.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And that's actually something that others have told me as well.
Really?
And have, it really encouraged me to kind of poke at that a little bit, right? And
showcase it.
Yeah. And even like, I think part of like everything else is like being able to articulate that, and then figuring out, okay, how do we let that resonate? How do we let that be more visible in the curriculum, right? In a way that still stays true to who we are as a major, right? But there are pieces that's clearly like, you're an example. There's others that demonstrate that there's value, right? And just figuring out a way to present that value, right? I think we have done a really good job of keeping a low profile. Partly it's because of our name too, mechanized systems management. It's not like you're a high school student be like, yeah, I kind of get ag business agronomy. What the heck is mechanized systems management, right?
Yeah.
And so, so there's that, but the mystery is also really good too, because once you discover it, you kind of buy into it, right? And I see that from some students. You're getting a lot more kids coming out of Lincoln and Omaha, transferring in. They think they want to be a mechanical engineer because they have this idea in their head of what engineering is, and they realize about a half a semester, 2 semesters into college, it's not what I have. And then they find mechanized systems, and they're thinking, boy, that clicks.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've got that group too that's finding value in this. Right. And so I think you're onto something. I think we got to do a better job of trying to articulate those value propositions from our major.
Yeah. Because that's really interesting. Because if you look at it from an engine, if you compare it to engineering, you come out, with your PE, or you get your PE after you come out of the school, and then you go be an engineer somewhere, and maybe you make partner, maybe you grow, you become a managing partner of an engineering firm. Like, that'd be great, right? There's so many different routes and avenues you can take once you get out of Mech Systems, with as far as like growing up into that, and you say, okay, I could become a plant manager here, could become an owner operator here. And obviously people with engineering degrees have that same capacity, but I think there's we have a box, you fit in the box sort of mentality with when you come out of engineering. Whereas like when it's Mech Systems, it's like, we just showed you all the boxes, pick one and go into it.
And I think part of it is, as I look through the next generation of students coming in, they're going to need a little bit more direction navigating those boxes, right? I think I've really tried to pay attention to what I call micro generational shifts, because people talk about like, oh, the millennials and this and that, but I think every few years there's a shift, right? And so if I'm to be effective with my students as an educator, I need to know that. I need to understand and respond to that, right? And so like with you, there was a different sort of need that I had to address as I was mentoring and teaching you and learning from you, right? It's a joint effort. It's different now, and I have to pay attention to those differences.
Why? What's the difference? So more entrepreneurs. I think more kids know what entrepreneurship is. They want it.
Yes, it's definitely in the vocabulary more, right?
Yeah,
it's out there, but I think there's also there's a little bit more anxiety as well about the world they're living in. I
mean, yeah,
right.
Especially in the last 6 months. But I meant take that portion out of it more. Say before the last 6 months.
Before the last 6 months too. I think there is just general uncertainty.
Oh, okay.
Right. I sense that. I sense there's a little bit more uncertainty. The students are they've got more of an altruistic mindset. I've noticed that for sure. There's a desire to see more positive change in the world, but they're not quite sure how to go about it. There's a little bit more uncertainty there, right? So whereas when you were going through school, I saw a little bit more of like the ability to turn right only to realize you had to turn left. And that's okay. That's a win, right? The worst situation is what? Your decision paralysis, right? You're just standing there. So what I'm sensing now is sometimes a reluctance to take that right turn for the fear you should have taken a left and then just staying put. That's just a little bit of, this is not my area. I'm not an expert in like people and what. That's the sense I get as an educator as I talk to students. And so that's kind of what I have to respond to now as well. And that influences how I teach, influences, how I do advising and so forth. So
knowing that they are hesitant to make their decisions, and that's decision paralysis is becoming more real with more choices.
Yes.
With more options.
Absolutely.
Right?
And right now, boy, all you got to look is seeing career pathways, what's coming down the pipeline, technologies. I can do this, I can do that. I mean, there's a lot to choose, right? So I think helping students make smart decisions as they go through the major is going to be important as well. Yeah.
And there's a level of consciousness that you don't get until you get out of school. I feel like there is at least for me, this is how this was. Maybe I'm not speaking for everybody, but there's a certain point where you're kind of like on rails, and you got to hope that like the person that you're trusting, and like, thank God in Mech Systems we had you, but I have friends that didn't have someone like you in other majors at school, and they didn't have like that advisor mentorship type of mentality when they were going through. And I know how important that was though, but I was able to kind of like just focus on the work because I felt like somebody was watching over my 10,000 foot view. Yeah. And that's really important.
It is. And I think every student deserves that.
They do. Right? If they're gonna pay that sort of money for education, they absolutely do.
Don't get me started on that. Yeah. I have my own issues with how higher education costs. That'd be a whole subject of another podcast, I'll tell you, man.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point too. What do you think companies need to be doing now to attract top talent in your world? The people that you're teaching, like what do companies need to be doing? We have business owners that listen to this. So
great question. I think there's two things. One is being willing to invest in their ongoing development is key. Right. I think that
showing that on the onset.
Showing that right off the bat. We're not like 10 years ago. Yeah, you work 3 years and then maybe we'll consider paying for you to go to grad school part-time to get an MBA, right?
That's not a thing.
That's great a few years ago, right? But I think the conversation has shifted. It's you talked about the pace of innovation earlier, right? I think there's a desire to learn. And so communicate that. We're here to support that, right? We're here to support your professional development, right? And this is how we're going to do it. Be explicit about that. So that's one thing. The second thing is I come back to this point about that desire to make a difference, desire to make a change, right? I think companies that demonstrate that vividly, this is how through your work you can make a difference because this aligns with what we do as a company and this is your role in that is important, right? Communicating how your work is going to help our company make a difference in this world. That's a key piece there too, right? The kids they are wanting to know that, right?
That is one of the micro shifts that I think
Yes.
I've felt.
Yes.
In hiring different people,
Yep.
because what people do is they'll typecast millennials and they'll say, well, millennials don't necessarily care as much about money. They care just as much about change as they do. And, philanthropy, right, is a good example of like something where it's like purpose over money.
Yep.
But I think that's becoming even more apparent in the last 2 to 4 years.
Yeah. And it's not an either or, right?
Yeah.
Just because you want to be successful financially and thrive doesn't mean you don't want to see positive
Right.
in the world, right?
Yeah.
You can do both. And I'm seeing that there's a desire to make sure that organizations they're part of have that. And the third piece is, I think you're going to see more of a desire to have companies willing to let you explore stuff outside of work, right? We value that. We want you to be a whole person. That means you work here, you do a good job, but we recognize that your life outside of work matters, right? And we're a company that's willing to support that. So I see great examples of companies that have employees get together on their own time, right, after work to work on a community effort from the company. That tells me that they're doing something right. Because why would you take time outside of your work to hang out with people you work with to do something under the company banner?
Right.
Because it is aligned with what their values are. So I think being able to communicate how does what we do both in work and what we allow you to thrive outside of work, right? How are we going to support that? So there's that third piece too, because I sense a desire that people want to live those whole lives, right? Because your job isn't who you are, it's what you do. There's more to you as a person, right? And companies that can recognize that and communicate that to employees, they're the ones that are going to get the good talent, in my mind.
Yeah.
Wow,
that's an excellent answer to that question. There's a lot of little clips in there that I'm sure we'll want to share individually, because like I said, we have a lot of business owners that listen to this and they're always looking like, how can we get an edge on our competitors? And hiring is something we never really talked about all that much. Talk about the projects that you've been able to do. I think the university has actually done a really good job of like letting you do that, and letting you be still obviously have your full-time job in several different departments of the university, but yet being an entrepreneur. Like, you get to play this game with us.
Yeah.
So talk about that, what that's like, and when did you know you wanted to do something entrepreneurial? Has it always been in your blood, or when did you know? Because the show is called Spark to Fire, right?
Absolutely.
So it's the moment where we unpack, like, when did you make the decision that you were going to be on the path that you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it was, I think it's a combination of having the right people supporting you, right, and giving you enough freedom to explore, right? I'll be honest, my background, right? I didn't grow up on a farm. I'm not I kind of got into agriculture when I was in graduate school, right? For me, I realized I wanted to teach and do research, and I saw agriculture as this great opportunity because I saw the connections to energy, food, fuel, water, all those things. And I was like, boy, this is where I want to spend my time, right? So that decision was made. And then I realized I wanted to teach, right? So I got here at the university. But as I navigated, one of the realizations I had was that I'm not equipped to do my job really well. I have the disciplinary knowledge, but I need to be a better student of my students. I need to be a better student of who my students are. I need to learn about them, right? So I had a great opportunity to have a wonderful dean who supported me in that journey, right? So that's opened up a lot of doors, right? It opened up me being a better advisor, right?
Yeah.
I worked hard at it, but I realized I needed to. And I had supporting mentors, a boss that said, this is important. Clearly you care about your students. Let's invest in that. So they gave me space to do that, right?
Yeah, they
So
do.
having supporting people that give you space to do that is important, right? Not that I wasn't doing everything else. I had to, right? To be successful, I had to make sure, my research was going and I was publishing and all that great stuff, getting grants in. But I also wanted to develop my abilities to relate to my students, right? So that was my first sort of spark, right? The realization that in order for me to be the person that my students needed to be, I had to learn. I had to spend time learning about them, right? I bring in a sense of humility to my classroom and my interactions with students. I don't know all the answers. My job is to help collectively figure it out, right? There's a perspective shift, right?
Yeah.
When you have that humility. And
it's not most professors either.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, I'm not. There are others. Don't get me wrong, but I do feel like we need more of that approach with students, right? So I think that was my first spark. That opened up a lot of other doors. I think the other thing is, I think by nature, I'm a little bit of an instigator, right?
Okay. What
I
do you mean by
tend to
that?
be. So I've done a lot of inventories over the years. One of the inventories I've taken is sort of where are you on that change spectrum? Are you a conserver? Are you more of a let's change for really wanting to push change?
You're
I
a
tend to be.
catalyst.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
tend to be like, I wanna try to stir things up to see what we can come up, right? There's a part of me that's there.
Yeah.
I have to temper it down, obviously, at times in my job, but I think that part of me makes me want to kind of poke at things and say, what is here, right? I'll give you a great example. Several years ago, I had an opportunity to do a wildly crazy thing, right? Work on a grant with a journalism professor and a playwright and a musician. Right? That was years ago, right?
Very odd combo.
Yeah, that was back in like 2013, 2014, something along those lines.
Yeah.
But that project was in my world, I view that for me as being really entrepreneurial project because I was working with people that I didn't even know what language to speak in with them, right? I mean, it is hard for somebody like technical engineering background, and I'm sitting and we're trying to write a proposal with a musician and a playwright, right?
What was it for?
So it was the Rural Futures Institute had a grant opportunity, right?
Okay.
And so I was at that time I had taken on a learning community on campus, and I was kind of navigating that space, and I was really interested in this idea of ag literacy, technology, and helping students understand agriculture. And they had the same ideas, but through the lens of art and music.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so we got together and we wrote a grant to the Rural Futures Institute. And guess what? They funded it. Right? And it was an amazing 2.5-year journey, but it taught me a lot of things. It taught me that that itch that I had, I need to make sure that when that comes, I owe it to myself to ask, what is there? Is there something here that is interesting, right?
Yeah.
Am I going to learn? And my students benefited from that. We had a great opportunity. We did some really wonderful work. But I also learned that those things are possible even in higher ed, which, people give a bad rap, structured and, ivory tower. Yeah, there's that, but there's also opportunities like this, right?
Right.
And so I grabbed that opportunity, and those relationships have been very enduring, right? And years later, I mentioned earlier on that I'm part of this group called Blixt, Learning Locally Grown. It's a nonprofit. Same people that we wrote a grant together.
Oh, it's the same people.
Same people. We got together years later.
Because you were successful at it, and you could work with each other.
Yeah, and
balance
so
each other out.
and so they had this idea for a nonprofit, and they reached out and said, "Do you want to be on the board?" I'm like, "Sign me up.
Done.
I'm there, right?" Because it doesn't matter. I mean, we all bring different perspectives to it, right? So I'd say that there is a part of me that I think that instigator in me that wants to learn and explore new things that makes me pursue these things. That's part of it. The second part of it is that how do I say? I don't want to be cheesy here, right? But I have explored a lot about what drives me, what makes me do what I do.
Oh, so have I.
You know?
I'm really interested to go down this vein too.
I think that part of one of the things that drives me is this idea that everybody's lives are stories. And I really genuinely believe that every single person deserves their story to be a good one. That's sort of my motivation, right? In a lot of things I do, okay? It makes me want to be a better teacher. It makes me want to do better research to help people. It makes me want to pursue these creative projects on the side. If it can help somebody write their story and make it a better story, right? And that is, for me, what I think a reason for my willingness to pursue these, you use the word entrepreneurial adventures. I just call them kind of crazy adventures, projects, right? And some of them fail. Some of them are okay, great. Tried something, didn't work. But I think that desire, that's part of it, right? I have a tendency to want to do things, but then there's this, I think, underlying reason where if I think it's going to help somebody write their story better, I'll do it.
Right.
I'll do it.
And you get that at scale because you get to work with so many kids.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's got to be another fulfilling part of it.
It is. Starting from, you come in your first semester to when you graduate and beyond, right?
So you get to see kids, come in as an absolute shit show as an 18-year-old, and then you get to watch them walk out as a 22-year-old. Like, hey, actually, I do all right. that's
yeah. So there is that short-term validation, right? Hey, and you don't like. I'm not. I want to be careful here to say it. It's good to observe that, but I also have to remind myself that I had a part, but just a small part, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of moving pieces in that person's story, but I think if I remind myself that I have that responsibility to do that, I think that helps me make decisions on what I choose to do in terms of projects and entrepreneurial ventures. So,
and what advice would you give to people that think they would like to go into entrepreneurship, into business for themselves?
That's a fantastic question, because I think it gets at something very important. It gets at having a very clear understanding of who you are as a person, mm-hmm. and what your motivations are, right? I think you can call it whatever you want, but I believe that all humans, there's a struggle. There's the part of us that wants to do good things, but there's also the part of us that says, you don't want to do that, right? It starts in the morning, right? You get up in the morning, there's a part of you that says, sleep in a little bit longer.
Right.
But there's a part of you that says, hey, you got an opportunity, something today, right? And so you need to understand that about yourself, right? You need to understand what drives you, so that when you're in that dilemma, you make the choice that really needs to be made, right? Mm-hmm. So I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, I think you owe it to yourself to explore, why do you want to do what you want to do? The underlying reason, right? Yes, you want to make that. You see an opportunity, you see a market potential for a product. That's great, right? But I would challenge you to ask yourself a deeper question. Why is it important for you to do that? And more importantly, is it going to make somebody's lives better? And I really believe
not enough people ask that question.
That is so...
not enough people ask that last question.
Yeah. That's because that is the key thing. Because for me, that's enduring.
Right.
Right.
Though you can do that. You can do that forever.
Yeah.
You could, if that's your North Star,
yeah,
you can chase that forever.
And it doesn't matter whether you're doing it, like I'm under no illusion, right now, okay, I love my job. I'm happy at it. I get an opportunity to work with, but there's part of me that motivation for why I do what I do. Mm-hmm. I don't have to be in higher ed to do it.
No.
Right?
No.
So I'm not under the illusion 10 years from, I could be doing something else. But I think I have that underlying reason. As long as that stays and I understand it and I believe in it, then maybe I can look at something else and say, well, that's another way for me to do this, right? A while ago, I went through this year-long leadership development program for university faculty, right?
Oh, okay.
It was just across the country. I was selected in Nebraska to go, and we spent a lot of time in exploring oneself. Very, very powerful thing. One of the things that I learned from that was the importance of living a complete life, right? That means who you are at work needs to be consistent with who you are at home, which needs to be consistent with who you are in a community, right? You cannot compartmentalize to the extent that you're different people. Right. I think the world tells you need to separate, right?
Yeah.
That is, for me, it doesn't work. And so living that complete life helps me see opportunities, right?
Right.
So I am not Deepak, the faculty member. I am not Deepak who does this nonprofit. Those are all the same person, right? It's just they manifest my desires and my goals in different ways, mm-hmm. right? So I think I strive to live that holistic, complete life that's consistent across all the worlds that I'm living in every day. And I think that's very critical for an entrepreneur too.
For sure. To live a whole life.
You live a whole life. It keeps you balanced because, entrepreneurs, from what I can gather, are prone to working sometimes harder than they should, right? So you will then, I think people who strive to live that complete life will know when to slow down to take care of themselves, mm-hmm. right? Because if you want to be good at your job, you want to be effective for your team, you got to take care of yourself too, right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece as well. So I think it aligns with this idea, if I can strive to live a complete whole life, then I'll know the balance. Right?
Yeah. And
that's kind of important too.
I ask that question a lot to people we have on the show is, what do you think work-life balance is? I think it's 100% subjective. Mm-hmm. Your balance is not my balance.
Absolutely.
Right?
Everybody's is different.
Everyone's is different. And
but you have to ask the questions of yourself, right? I think that's self-awareness.
You still need to know what your balance is, but it is not the same. Mm-hmm. Ray Kroc doesn't have this or didn't have the same balance as, you know, take somebody on the other side of the spectrum, you know, somebody that is an amazing, not stay-at-home dad, but wants to be at every single event for their kids. That wasn't Ray Kroc, but that was his balance.
And you owe it to yourself to understand what that is for you.
Right.
And recognize that seasons of life, right? There's a season, and sometimes seasons change, and being attuned to that, right? And that's important too, right?
Yeah.
I think that's critical, right? There was a season about 10, 15 years ago in my life that is not who I am right now, right? The underlying person is still the same, but it shows up differently. And what I do looks different, right? But as long as it aligns with my desire to, you know, to see that change in people and to help them write their story, I'm comfortable making changes.
Yeah. What do you do to, so 2 questions. What are your routines every day? And then what do you do to stay so high energy? And I'm sure routines help with that, but you have always had, like, I rarely would run into your office and see you have a bad day. You know, I think like you just operate on a higher frequency than most people. And that's why I wanted to have you in here. So how do you get to that point, and what have you done to prepare yourself for it?
Really good question. And first I want to be completely honest, right? I got my fair share of struggles, dude. We all do, right?
Yeah.
You know, I've had my issues with anxiety too. I do. I have my issues with being emotional. I do. But part of one of my behaviors that helps me is I've been very intentional about regulating. I regulate my emotions. So emotions aren't bad, right? We all get angry. We all get sad. We all get frustrated. We all get annoyed. I mean, those are natural things. In fact, they're useful because they help us give us where we are. But what's important is to regulate, right? So that you are constantly asking yourself, why are you feeling what you're feeling, right?
Yeah.
That's so critical, right? Because if you
Emotional
ask yourself, then you're in control, right? I try to be in control by regulating those emotions, right? So that's one strategy that has helped me a lot, right? The second thing is in terms of behaviors and habits, right? You heard of Covey's quadrants? So
yes,
Stephen Covey's
important, not important, urgent, not urgent.
That's a really powerful tool, right? It's
really
not
is.
used as much, but I think it's a really powerful tool because it helps you. I think the trick to it's not a trick, but I think for me, what works in terms of how I can stay high energy, and for me, it's about meeting the needs of my students and whoever else I'm serving, right? That means I have to use my time well.
Yeah.
Right? So that's important. So I need to make sure that I'm spending time in the quadrants that matter, right? Because the nature of our jobs is it actually prevents us from spending time in that all-important quadrant, the stuff that's important but not urgent. That's the stuff that everything else we do takes away from that, and we need to prioritize time for that. So I've been really lately intentional about doing that. That has been helpful for me to stay grounded. So that's that second piece, right? That hugely important. And the third piece is mentoring, man.
Do you have a bunch of mentors?
I do.
How many?
Right now, I would say I've got 3 or 4 people that I regularly connect with.
Yeah.
Right. And they're all different stages of life. You know, just because somebody doesn't have to be an older person to be a mentor, right?
No.
I have a former student who I regard as a mentor, right? And so for me, that's kind of important because you need that person to, first of all, a lot of different things. One is there has to be a level of trust that you can ask them anything, and they need to hold you accountable, right? So having people that can hold you accountable is important too. So that's the third piece. But I apologize. I haven't answered your question, right? You know, you asked me about my day-to-day routine.
No, this is great. I want to know about that too. It's all about a part of it.
So I think that for me, I try to be intentional about my interactions every day. So one of the first things I do every morning is I just get time to myself, right? I sit down, cup of coffee, and I literally sit on a couch and I think through my day ahead. Who am I meeting, right? What is the point of that meeting? And I ask myself and remind myself, okay, is that interaction, am I going to walk away from that interaction having elevate a situation, having made their story a better one, maybe move forward on a project, So I try to plan my day through the lens of the interactions I'm having with people.
Love
That
You're
helps me.
visualizing.
Yeah, it helps me so much because then I know that also then made me realize today is not a good day to have this meeting. And I'm okay pulling the plug on that.
Interesting.
Right?
So okay.
What's
So
wrong with
say
that?
you get some really horrible news in the morning,
Yeah.
and most people be like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm just going to cancel this because I really can't do this right now. But that's the depth of which they go. But you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, I am not in a state where I'm going to be good in this meeting. I can't be the best for this person right now. But if I give myself 48 hours, I can kick out. I will absolutely crush this meeting. It'll be great.
Yeah. Why not?
That's really interesting.
And it does.
I've never met anybody that says it quite like that.
And there's nothing wrong with that because some people view that as saying, well, you're a coward.
No,
it's not cowardice because you're actually you're doing it the right way because you want to make sure that you can contribute and have an impact, right?
And the best version of you shows up to that meeting.
Yes.
That's really interesting. So the commonality that I'm finding with high performing, like elite people and what they do is that they do a lot of visualization. Jack Riggins, Navy SEAL commander, 20-year veteran, does visualization, meditation, deep breathing, all that stuff all the time. Yeah. And so when he uses that an example of like when I'm going home, how do I want to show up to this meeting? Am I going to show up high energy for my wife and my kids? Like that itself, before any sort of big thing, guys, if you take one thing out of this is plan on how you want to show up and actually say the intention and the emotion that you want to feel when you show up to that meeting. Yeah. I would like to be high energy in this meeting. If it's like a pitch or a proposal, right?
Absolutely.
Or say it's something where you have to basically deliver bad news. I want to be calm, collected, and non-emotional in this meeting. That labeling your emotions before and after when they're happening is one of the most powerful things that I've found.
And it comes back to that point I made about being able to regulate, right?
Yeah.
If you are aware of your own circumstances, boy, you're going to be that much more useful to the people that you serve and the people that you are committing to help succeed, right?
That is emotional intelligence. Like that's one of the core. I'm working on some training right now in emotional intelligence, and that is one of the core principles of it. Is you have to be able to label, regulate, or excuse me, I think it goes. You have to label it, then understand what you're going to do, and then what you're going to do about it afterwards. And I know I'm butchering that from the guide that I have, but there's a really important piece where you have to say, how do I want to show up to this? How do I want to regulate this emotion? And you have to, because right now, like when you're in your head and like the worst thing happens and you're just like beyond mad, right? I mean, you're next level pissed off, right? Yeah. You need to be able to say, and de-escalation is another thing. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So instead of going into the, using expletive to describe how pissed off you are, you could say, I'm just a little frustrated at this right now. And what that does is just, you consciously know you're really mad about it, but you're minimizing it for yourself. Yeah.
And the thing about that is this is not a destination. I don't think we're all going to be expert, and we're not. It's a process, right? Because the circumstances change. We have to be on top of things.
You're navigating.
Yeah. And the final piece I'd say that I feel helps me be successful in terms of, and I'll use a student example, right? I believe that I need to be available and successful to my students. So one of the things that I have worked really hard, it's hard sometimes, but I try my best, is to live an interruptible life. Okay? That means I cannot schedule myself to the point where I don't have time for interruptions. Right? Because in the world that I live in, if I schedule myself to the hilt, student walks in the door, that student's got an emergency. Right. I have to have some bandwidth that's there for me to respond to things that I'm not anticipating, right? I think too often in our world, we are taught that being productive is to have a full schedule, right? And I feel like that is, for a lot of reasons, unhealthy. But for me, I think it helps me not serve the people I want to serve better if I don't have enough space to allow for those interruptions. And guess what? People say, well, that's not using your time well. I'm like, no. I call BS on that, because guess what? If no interruptions happen, that's time for me to think. That's time for me to process what I've just experienced. Yeah. Times for me to process my next meeting. So give yourself that ability, live an interruptible life, right? And I did not claim that line. I read it somewhere. It's scriptural based, but it's a really interesting mantra for me, is to try to figure out, do I have enough space for an interruption? Guess what? Because that interruption could be a great opportunity walking through your door.
Massive. Yeah.
Right?
But if you're in the wrong headspace and you deny that meeting,
Yep.
it could be a massive project opportunity for you. You know, they
Yeah.
walk in, they're like, I have this great idea.
Yeah.
Like, not right now.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, that's a prime example. Not right now. I'm too busy for that.
Yeah.
And you did live that life. When I was in school, and we could bring back this full circle here, like when we were in school, like you had to, because we didn't know what we were doing. We were coming into new situations all the time.
Yep.
And then you're actively dealing with brand new people all the time, every year.
Yep. And I think approaching my job that way, I have found a lot of value. I know that students benefit from it, but I benefited from it because it is that moments when a student comes in confused, I'm not sure what to do, I'm sorry I didn't get, that's the moment I get to learn something about that student.
Yeah.
Right? At a much deeper level.
Well, and you get to have an impact there.
Yeah.
Huge impact.
And a relationship is built that's beyond transactional, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's another side advantage of that is I can't imagine doing another way.
No. That's incredible. And I appreciate you sharing your, not even just your routines, but your mentality of how you go about approaching making kids more successful in college, and then also yourself. I think that makes a lot more sense now, because we never got to have this conversation when I was 18 to 22, but it makes a lot more sense now as we kind of bring this around. So dude, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for coming in.
It is great. My pleasure. And again, I have to say this, it just tickles me. I'm just so glad to see all this stuff here.
Yeah.
It warms my heart, man. I don't know.
That's cool.
It's hard as an educator, to see every time I get an opportunity to connect with a former student that's doing something interesting, or just, their lives grow and stuff. It makes it all come back. I'm like, yep, that is what you do it for. So
worth it.
It's totally worth it.
That's awesome.
Thanks for having me, Landon.
You bet. Guys, it's going to wrap it up for another episode of Spark to Fire. Like I said in the beginning of the episode, please take time to write a review and leave a 5-star rating on iTunes. And then if you could, just take a screenshot of your podcast and send it on your Instagram story, and just tag Spark to Fire podcast in it, and Life of Landon. Tag me in that, and make sure you share this with your friends. I know this is valuable content, and it can help someone. And it would mean the world if you guys would share it. So that's going to do it for another episode. Keep striking.